Good evening, everyone. My name is Deb Stulagros, and I am an elder at Community Presbyterian Church of Ben Avon. We are the sponsors of this speaker series, and we are very pleased to have created a relationship with St. Brendan's Episcopal Church. And so this speaker series will continue throughout the year. Each church is going to be scheduling sessions, and we will be jointly promoting the sessions. The first presentation in the series was held in March. We had Tony Norman of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette who spoke with us. And this evening, we are very pleased to have Tim Stevens join us. I want to be sure that I mention that I'm greeting you all on behalf of Community Presbyterian Church of Ben Avon. Our pastor, Donna Giver Johnston, is unavailable. She may be joining by phone, but I'm welcoming everyone on behalf of Donna and our session. Also, I wanted to mention that this evening's presentation is being recorded, and we will have the recording available on the church website, which is cpcba.org. I'll put that link in the chat shortly. So if you'd like to share this with anyone else, please go to our website or direct them to our website, and they will be able to see the presentation in its entirety. The way that this evening's going to work is that I'm going to introduce Tim momentarily, and then he has Lost Lessons and Future Possibilities. Tim has put together materials. I understand that just about killed him. The gray in his hair was not there a week ago, if you look him up on WTAE. So Tim has put together some thoughts to share with us tonight. What I'd like to ask you to do is think about questions that you have and maybe jot them down, but what we're going to do is to ask you to put your questions in the chat, in the Zoom chat. And to get to that, if you hover at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there should be a little bubble with the word chat underneath it. Click on that and it will bring up a little window where you can type in questions. So for this evening's presentation then, Tim's going to do his presentation, and afterwards we will allow question and answer with Tim through the chat. So if you have questions, type them in the chat, and then after the presentation, I'll be asking questions on behalf of those that put them in the chat, and Tim will impart wisdom to us in response to the questions that you pose. So when it comes to your questions, please feel free to type them in the chat anytime during the presentation, or if you'd like to wait to ask your questions at the end in the chat, that's fine as well. So again, welcome to tonight's presentation, and I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Tim Stevens. I'll tell you a little bit about Tim, but I'd like to hopefully get to his part of the talk as quickly as possible. By education, Tim has a bachelor's in political science and a master's in urban and regional planning. And then he became, for many years, the director of volunteer resources at Mayview State Hospital, which was part of the Pennsylvania state mental health system. So Tim has had a large opportunity to connect with a lot of people who, through his work with the volunteers who helped Mayview State Hospital. Now, Tim also is a longtime civil rights activist, and in particular, he is the founder and now the Black Political Power Project, better known as BPEP. And there are two major programs underneath BPEP, in addition to the Black Political Empowerment Project's work. One is the Coalition Against Violence, and the other is the Corporate Equity and Inclusion Roundtable. So Tim has started an organization that's been around now since 1986, the Black Political Empowerment Project, and has put himself in the center of many, many controversies in the city of Pittsburgh and our region, and is a spokesman for many, many different challenges that we face, including recently. So if you want to see Tim speak, just Google him or Bing him or whatever you want to on the internet. He has been someone who has been asked to speak on behalf of the African-American community many times. Tim also was the president of the Pittsburgh branch of the NAACP from 1994 to 2004. And he works tirelessly. I could go on for a long time, but in particular, recently over this last year, Tim has been an instrumental part of the Community Task Force in Police Reform in the city of Pittsburgh, which was convened last June. And when I say works tirelessly, I really mean it. Tim also, I will say, is a personal friend of mine, and I have come to know him well and respect him immensely as someone who is very thoughtful. So I can't wait to hear what he has to say. I'll mention that for those of you who've come to the Community Presbyterian Church of Ben Avon's Jazz Festival in the past, Tim, who is a longtime jazz vocalist in Pittsburgh and musician with the Tim Stevens Project, and is singing on June 8th at Conalma in Shadyside at 6 p.m. Just a little plug there. But Tim sang twice at our Jazz Fest in 2 summers, and it was absolutely spectacular. So Tim, thank you for that. Tim also is the longtime organist at Trinity AME Church in the Hill on Wiley Avenue, where he shows up every Sunday and shares his musical talents there as well. So Tim, welcome, and I will hand it over to you for your thoughts on the topic of lost lessons and future possibilities. Thank you again for being with us.
First of all, to all on the call, thanks for being on the call, and hopefully you'll stay till the end of this excitement. I wanted to thank Deb, my friend who happens to also host the Black Political Empowerment Project's Corporate Equity and Inclusion Roundtable website for a number of years now, and we are here to address what we came up with. It's called Lost Lessons and Future Possibilities. Try and keep that in mind while we talk. Lost Lessons and Future Possibilities, the ongoing struggle for racial equity in the Pittsburgh region. I don't think that Deb knows that in my very early single-digit years of my life, I attended a Presbyterian church in the Hill District, Grace Memorial Presbyterian Church. My mom, Georgetta Stevens, was, I believe, one of the first female deacons and led her prayer circle for some 25 years. And though I've been a member of Trinity AME Church since I believe about 8 years old, I do have some early Presbyterian roots. So we have a little connection there that I thought some of you may appreciate. Many of us as citizens in the Pittsburgh region and citizens of the United States of America, with the level of divisiveness that unfortunately thrives today in politics and race, ethnicity, and even sexual orientation, are beginning to have nightmares of our future possibilities versus having dreams of the beloved community of which Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King spoke so eloquently. And in my early years, my early 20s, I had the nerve to think by some time in the 21st century, race would pretty much be a non-factor on how we interacted with each other and how we perceived each other as human beings. I've often stated that God had a warped sense of humor and that he or she created race, sexual orientation, ethnicity, and then we had the nerve to create political parties. I was raised with the belief that America would one day live up to its creed, that all of its citizens would one day be treated equally and fairly. However, the percentage of Black and brown people in our Allegheny County jail and in prisons across this country say dramatically otherwise. The fact that reports several weeks ago stated that in Pennsylvania and across the nation, even though African Americans were 2 or 3 times likely to get the coronavirus as whites, we were also 2 to 3 times less likely to be offered the vaccines to combat this virus. When BPEP launched the Corporate Equity and Inclusion Roundtable, CEIR, in 2011, the 10-county Pittsburgh region was listed as 40th out of 40 regions in the nation with regard to conditions of the Black working poor and Black children, what I refer to as a reverse #1 rating. Though the city of Pittsburgh and the Pittsburgh region has often bragged about our #1 ratings and our top 10 ratings, this is not a rating of which to be proud. A Three Rivers Workforce Investment Board report of 2012 stated that African Americans in the Pittsburgh region were making less than other groups in the same sector of work. These were indeed possibilities of fairness for our region, which were apparently lost in the implementation of discriminatory employment and retainment policies and procedures of too many workforces in our region. In my opinion, one of the most frightening statistics we discovered while laying the foundation for the work of CEIR was that in 2010 Census Bureau report reported that white Americans had 20 times the wealth of African Americans and 18 times the wealth of Hispanic Americans or Latinx. We often think about these drastic discrepancies being reflected with only the poor African American community, but in a 2012 survey conducted by the National Association for Law Placement nationwide, minorities accounted for just 6.71% of law firm partners, 20.32% of law firm associates. But in Pittsburgh, minorities accounted for only 2.3% of the 395 partners and 8.9% of the law firm associates based on information submitted by 8 law firms with offices in Pittsburgh. It's important to note that Pittsburgh had the second lowest percentage of minority partners of the 42 cities represented in the nationwide survey. In terms of future possibilities to impact the ongoing struggle for racial equity in the Pittsburgh region, BPEP's Corporate Equity and Inclusion Roundtable, CEIR working group, over the last 8 years has fine-tuned its initiative for diversity, equity, and inclusion document. This is a document that we are asking every company, corporation, university, college, and major nonprofit to adopt, not for a year or so, but ongoingly, to impact the level of meaningful diversity, equity, and inclusion within their organization. Within this important document, we're asking each organization to adopt what we call the comprehensive Rooney Rule with results. This powerful tool advocates African Americans be considered for all positions from entry level through the C-suite and for all contracting procurement opportunities. The rule embraces an intentional commitment to achieve new, meaningful, and measurable results of diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout the entire organization. We feel that efforts of this rule should, in the long run, impact all communities of color. In addition, the CEIR initiative encourages all entities throughout the Pittsburgh region to adopt Ban the Box. The Ban the Box policy, which, by the way, City of Pittsburgh and Allegheny County have already adopted, so that the question of prior arrest and or convictions does not appear on the job description. Included in this approach is an updating of human resource policy so that prior convictions are evaluated to determine relevancy to the position being sought. In the opinion of BPEP and CEIR, in terms of future possibilities for racial equity throughout the Pittsburgh region, the full and ongoing implementation of Ban the Box and the many policies and procedures identified in the CEIR initiative will, over a period of years, have a profound impact on the conditions of African Americans, which will in turn lower the violence in so many of our African American communities due to the absence of access to employment and entrepreneurial opportunities, which have existed and persisted for decades and in fact for centuries. Art Rooney II, president of the Pittsburgh Steelers, thought enough of our CEIR document to adopt it as a primary document for diversity, equity, and inclusion for his organization, and has committed to share it with leaders of all of the National Football League teams. It's the hope of BPEP and CEIR that future possibilities for the use of this important document will fall on fertile ground. In the categories of lost lessons, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once wrote, quote, "If a man is called to be a street sweeper, he should sweep the streets even as Michelangelo painted, or as Beethoven composed music, or as Shakespeare wrote poetry. He should sweep streets so well that all the hosts of heaven and earth will pause to say, here lived a great street sweeper who did his job well." End of quote. Dr. King also wrote in one of his sermons something which you may not be as familiar with, quote, "If you can't be a tree on the top of a hill, be a shrub in the valley, but be the best little shrub by the side of the hill. Be a bush if you can't be a tree? If you can't be a highway, just be a trail. If you can't be a sun, be a star. For it matters not the size that you win or that you fail, but be the best at whatever you are. End of quote. The statement that follows his quote states, I will never do less than my best. And that's taken from a book, Think and Grow Rich, A Black Choice, Daily Motivations of African American Success by Dennis Kimbrough. My concern from these possible lost lessons is that many African Americans who from their childhood are encouraged to be the greatest street sweeper and to be the very best of whatever you are not always rewarded by white America for such positive accomplishments. The statistics just shared with you earlier seem to provide strength to the truth of these statements. However, as an African American constantly advocating for improved conditions and opportunities for African Americans, I strongly believe that we cannot afford to give up on those early lessons, but to instead continue to breathe life into them in order to create those future possibilities of greatness for ourselves and for our people. That goal cannot be met, however, without powerful, committed white allies who have a strong commitment to giving a rebirth meaningfully and ongoingly to those now nearly lost lessons. A lesson for future possibilities for Black and brown people locally and across the nation, as well as any of our marginalized partners, might be contained in this very powerful story, contained in the same publication mentioned above. Quote, there once was an African prince who was born a hunchback. On the prince's 13th birthday, the king asked him, what would he like to receive as a birthday gift? Bent over and looking up, the boy replied, I would like a statue of myself. The king was confused. The last thing in the world he wanted for his young son was for him to be mocked. In an effort to change the boy's mind, the king asked, quote, surely there must be something else you desire. But the prince was steadfast. No, I want a statue of myself, but I do not want a statue of myself as I appear now. Rather, I would like a statue of how I would look if I stood straight. Furthermore, I'd like this figure to be placed outside my window in the garden where I can see it every day. After the statue was built, the hunchback boy stood before his likeness each morning. Day in and day out, he stretched and strained to mimic the 6-foot replica. He did this without fail for 8 years. On his 21st birthday, he stood shoulders erect, head straight, staring eyeball to eyeball the bronze image. What was the prince's secret? As the poet says, what thou seest, thou beest. The author of the Daily Meditations provides this statement to the readers, quote, I will visualize success. And I say, as more African Americans and those who are marginalized visualize success and do so on a daily basis, maybe we can begin to more effectively impact the powerfully negative statistics shared earlier. However, as much as we may visualize success, as I asserted earlier, we cannot do it alone. We must have dedicated partners, such as hopefully some of you on this call tonight. Those of you who are in positions of power and influence to help decide who gets hired, who gets retained, who gets mentored, who gets promoted, and who gets contracts for the building of buildings, the laying of carpet, the painting of walls, or for needed professional services, must not be silent, either in your words or in your actions. The profound sins of the past will not be addressed through benign neglect, but only through ongoing, consistent, committed action. On the marquee of Pentecostal Temple Church in East Liberty, founded by the now unfortunately deceased Bishop Dr. Norman Mann, are these words this week, quote, evil triumphs when good men do nothing. And obviously we can add when good women do nothing. On the other hand, those of us who are Black, brown, with some disability or some marginalized nature must also learn to say, I can. One of my favorite R&B singers, the now late Teddy Pendergrass, who was also a spokesman for the physically challenged, said, quote, I know I'm going to make it in spite of my handicap. I will not be a prisoner of the chair. I know what I can do. I can, wrote the historian Charles Wesley, who dared to tell the world that the Black man had a history of note. Quote, I whispered Olympian Wyomia Tyus, who became the first person to capture gold medals in the 100-meter race in 2 consecutive Olympic Games. I can, thought Jewel Plummer Cobb, who was destined to make a name for herself in science and education. I can, shouted Jack Johnson, who dreamed of being the first Black man to wear the belt of the world heavyweight champion. Author Dennis Kimbrough states in his book, Think and Grow Rich, A Black Choice, that no one has ever received, gained, or accomplished anything in life without saying the 2 powerful words, I can. The statement I can is not future promise, but an affirmation of what we choose to create now. This principle spells the difference between the person who is the master of his fate and one who sees himself as a victim of uncontrollable forces, end of quote. I personally have stated that though African Americans have over the decades and the centuries indeed been victimized by heinous acts of racism, discrimination, and outright hate, we must not, however, view ourselves as victims. There is no power in viewing oneself as a victim. In terms of future possibilities, we must rise from these ashes of history to create new, powerful, and transformative realities for our future, for the future of our children, and for the future of our children's children. Author Dennis Kimbrough also states, quote, studies have revealed that we use less than 10% of our mental capacities. And likewise, we use less than 10% of our creative capacity. The only way to gain this unlimited happiness and potential is to learn to say, I can. And let me add that we are create those future possibilities. We will and we must say, I can. In terms of possibly lost lessons of the past, Harriet Tubman, known to many as the conductor of the Underground Railroad, once said, quote, I don't care how many times you hear the word no. You ain't gonna give up. Either live north or die, end of quote. Author Dennis Kimbrough talks of it's hammer time. He suggests that we should never underestimate the cumulative effect of the days we live, and puts it this way, quote, when a stone cutter bangs away at the stone with his hammer and wedge, he might hit the stone 100 times with no apparent effect, but on the 101st blow, the stone cracks. The point is, the 101st lick did not crack the stone itself. It was the cumulative effect of the 100 blows before that brought the results. Sometimes it seems all of our efforts are useless, but we keep trying. We struggle without giving hope. Then one day the victory we have sought belongs to us. It is not the final effort. It was all the effort that went before, like the stone cutter. I will hammer my way to success, end of quote. The historic election in Pittsburgh on May 18th demonstrates that truth. We vote in each and every election, and BPEP is 35 years old tomorrow, the 21st of May. The struggle for racial equality and racial equity in the Pittsburgh region, throughout Pittsburgh and the nation, will not be achieved without taking on the mantra of hammer time. We just can't stop. We can't afford to stop. Our future is at stake. We who are Black, brown, and marginalized have no choice. Those of you on this call have a choice to make. You can either be our strong allies to begin to help correct the wretched wrongs of the past and help create that beloved community, or you can choose to maintain the huge inequalities and equities that continue to exist and persist regionally and nationally by having no active agenda to create impactful change for the future. We are at a moment when, in my opinion, and I'm sure shared by millions, the future of who we are as a nation is at stake. The lessons of the past, which now absolutely seem to have been lost in the pit fire of extreme partisan politics, demonstrated how Democrats and Republicans could, in years gone by, actually cross the aisle and have in-depth, meaningful civil conversations and debates about the future of this country and actually find common ground. First, in terms of future possibilities, We have to find a way to agree on the facts, on what is real and what is truly fake news. We must find new ways to build bridges and to break down walls. I'm not certain how we do that. But if we're going to have the United States of America to ever be seen again as, quote, that shining city upon a hill, end of quote, described by none other than the former President Ronald Reagan, we better start hammering away. It appears, too, that locally and nationally, we must begin to hammer away at police reform and justice in the justice system. These issues continue to be paramount issues among people of color and many of our community partners of all colors, ages, and ethnicities. The issue of disparities in sentencing between white people and Black and brown people cause a profound impact on our communities. There's begun a movement in recent years to begin to seriously look at these ongoing and debilitating disparities in the application of justice. Maybe there are those on this call who can partner on this mission of seeking a new and meaningful level of justice in the so-called justice system. Many years ago, the late Bill Robinson, who had been during his political career a Pittsburgh City Councilman, a Pennsylvania State Legislator, and an Allegheny County Councilman, said to me in a one-on-one conversation that the issue that continues to plague the minds and hearts of Pittsburghers, Black Pittsburghers, has always been police brutality. If you followed the recent Ed Gainey commercials against Mayor Bill Peduto, you would have seen a great emphasis on the interactions between citizens and the police. One of the statistics that Gainey continued to state was that in a city with a population of approximately 23%, some 75% of arrests have been of Black people. And the 75% of traffic stops in Pittsburgh have been of Black people. Fair application of policing has never existed locally, nor in this country. And unfortunately, fairness in policing continues to be a goal yet still difficult to achieve. Some of you may not be aware or never gave much thought to the fact that one of the deepest roots of policing in this country go back centuries to when police were searching for slaves who had escaped their plantations. The role of the police was to return these fugitive slaves to their slave owners. As you can imagine, there has never been a lot of love lost between African Americans and police officers. The George Floyd murder on Memorial Day, May 25th, 2020, nearly 1 year ago, was so graphic and horrific that it spawned a level of outpouring from citizens of all ages, races, and ethnicities across this nation, and indeed the globe, at a level we've never seen before. What people witnessed on millions of television sets across this nation on May 25th, 2020, was indeed a modern day lynching. Fortunately, a brave 17-year-old young lady at the time, Darnella Frazier, had the audacity and the bravery to record the entire tragic episode. Without that powerful video, former police officer Derek Chauvin may never have been found guilty of the murder of George Floyd on all counts. The bravery of now 18-year-old Darnella Frazier clearly demonstrates how any individual, regardless of status in life, who possesses a commitment to the truth and to justice can make an absolute difference. We adults can take a page of courage from the life book of Miss Frazier. Some of you on this call, however, may due to your position in life, be in a key position to significantly influence, if not the policies of policing, you can influence the atmosphere around you and possibly impact the policies of where you work and or the decisions being made by political leaders and or corporate leaders who are in position to help influence the direction of this region, possibly the Commonwealth and the nation. I urge you to use the I can philosophy and make the difference that you are in position to make. Don't look for others to do it. You do it. Now, I can't let those of you who may view yourselves as just everyday people off the hook. You have power too. Don't doubt your ability to participate in creating your own hammer time. Everyone is in a position to use themselves as one who can assist in chipping away at the agonies that continue to haunt America. Never view yourself as useless or powerless. You are selling yourself short. You can at least make a phone call to an elected official, send an email, or write a letter expressing your outrage at the continued injustices locally and across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and the nation. Or if in a company or organization, by sharing your concerns with management on how some people are treated. The future possibilities of which we speak tonight can truly make America great again, depending on each and every one of us, not just the chosen few. In terms of lost lessons, I'm going to revisit the issue of policing, which continues to haunt this country on a daily basis. The Black community needs strong, understanding, and committed partners to achieve change. In his letter from the Birmingham jail in April 1963, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King wrote, quote, "You, the 8 fellow clergymen who had opposed the civil rights action in Birmingham, warmly recommended the Birmingham police for keeping order and preventing violence. I doubt that you would have so warmly recommended the police force if you had seen its dogs sinking their teeth into unarmed, nonviolent Negroes. If you had seen them slap and kick old Negro men and young boys," end of quote. In the 1963 book, Why We Can't Wait, Dr. King said this, quote, "One of the most ringing replies came from a child of no more than 8 who walked with her mother one day in a demonstration. An amused policeman leaned down to her and said with mock gruffness, quote, 'What do you want?' End of quote. The child looked into his eyes unafraid and gave her answer, quote, 'Freedom.' She could not even pronounce the word, but no Gabriel trumpet could have sounded a truer note." End of quote from Dr. King. One of the lost lessons in policing in this nation was exhibited in the death of George Floyd. On October 12, 1995, Johnny E. Gamage, a 31-year-old Black businessman, a cousin of then Pittsburgh Steeler Ray Seals, died while driving his cousin's expensive vehicle late at night in a very predominantly white neighborhood. Johnny Gamage was unarmed with no criminal record. His crime was driving while Black in an expensive car in a very white neighborhood. Johnny Gamage died of positional asphyxiation or positional asphyxia at the hands of white suburban police officers of Baldwin, Brentwood, and Whitehall. 25 years later, on May 25th, 2020, George Floyd was pronounced dead from positional asphyxiation. Apparently, the lesson of October 12, 1995 did not reach Minneapolis, Minnesota 25 years later. Such chokeholds are illegal and should never be used by any police officer. In future terms, or in terms of future possibilities, I had the opportunity with several other Pittsburghers to serve on the mayor's Pittsburgh Community Task Force for Police Reform. Though the 47-page report was not as comprehensive as some would have wanted, it was indeed a comprehensive 3.5-month report. And its findings and recommendations have begun to be reviewed by the Perdue administration, the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police, Scott Schubert, for purposes of implementation. Chief Schubert has met with a few of the original task force members on 2 occasions to share updates on implementation. Those updates, by the way, are on the city link. In addition, the Black Political Empowerment Project, BPEP, had proposed 20 recommendations for police reform in 2014 and brought those recommendations back in 2020, partially as a response to the death of George Floyd and the protests both locally and nationally. In addition, BPEP proposed some 24 police reform policies on July 8, 2020, in a 2-hour meeting with Mayor Peduto, his top staff, Safety Director Wendell Hisrick, who was on the call today, Chief Schubert and his top staff, which followed an earlier meeting with Chief Schubert and his staff on February 24, 2020, where BPEP and community partners have begun to introduce the changes reviewed on July 8th. On October 9th, 2021, we received, or 2020, I'm sorry, we received a written commitment for implementation from Mayor Peduto for 21 of BPEP's proposals for police reform. Members of BPEP and several community partners have met with Chief Schubert and his top staff on 3 occasions, including earlier today with his representatives to review the status of implementation of the agreed upon police reform commitments. So there are several future possibilities which are beginning to be implemented to help heal some of the scars of the past with regard to policing in Pittsburgh. In terms of future possibilities, BPEP and other community partners advocated over the last few years for a county-wide Allegheny County Civilian Police Review Board. Now the work begins to implement it. I was present to advocate for its passage when that legislation finally passed on April 27, 2021, and was present to advocate the purchase of body cams for 130 police departments throughout Allegheny County, which will hopefully help provide a new level of transparency and accountability throughout the county. On May 11th, when the body cam legislation was passed, I later sent a letter also advocating that Allegheny County members consider advocating for some of these smaller police departments to consolidate, to help share in the cost of a better trained and a more professional department, and to require that previous records of police officers who have worked in other departments be shared with any police department that is considering hiring such an individual. If such a policy had been in existence in the East Pittsburgh Police Department, when now former police officer Michael Rosfeld shot and killed 17-year-old Antoine Michael Rose II after only a few hours officially on the job, Antoine might still be alive today. Also, in our April 28th letter to County Council, BPEP strongly urged county members to share the latest You and the Police brochure, which the police departments within their council districts, and to urge that their officers be required to read the brochure, sign off that they've read it, and take the quiz that confirms their knowledge of the information in the brochure. This commitment was agreed to in the November 2019 meeting of BPEP and other community partners by both the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police and the Allegheny County Police Department. This approach to help bringing and building positive community relations was introduced today at a conference of over 70 chiefs of police of the largest police departments across the nation by our own Pittsburgh Chief, Scott Schubert. The most recent version of the Unit Police brochure is literally sort of a lost lesson, in that it was created in response to the death of Johnny E. Gamage that occurred on October 12, 1995, by the NACP Pittsburgh branch and ACLU of Greater Pittsburgh. It's been updated a few times since, in recent years, by my friend Beth Pittenger, Executive Director of the Citizens Police Review Board, leadership from the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police and BPEP. 2 new panels of information were actually added during the last 2 years at the urging of Pittsburgh Police Chief Scott Schubert, who thought that there should be more information on street contacts between citizens and police officers. In terms of future possibilities, my hope is that area police departments throughout Allegheny County will begin to accept and embrace these proposals for improvement in community police relations and seek new meaningful police measures. Most of you on this call are familiar with the killing of George Floyd on May 25th, 2020, and the killing of Breonna Taylor on March 13th, 2020, who was shot. But some of you may have also heard of unarmed Jake Blake, who was shot in the back 7 times by Kenosha, Wisconsin police on August 23rd, 2020, while his 3 children watched. Mr. Blake was attempting to break up an argument between 2 women. Jacob Blake was paralyzed. Ahmaud Arbery, age 25, was killed on February 23rd, 2020, shot twice with a shotgun while jogging in Brunswick, Georgia. The shooters claimed to be looking for a burglar. 2 of the 3 men involved had connections to local law enforcement, which may explain why they were not charged for 74 days until video of the shooting was widely circulated. Volando Castile, age 32, was killed on July 6, 2016 when pulled over because of a broken taillight. When he went to pull out his ID, he was immediately shot by police. His girlfriend was in the car as well as a 3-year-old. Eric Garner was killed by a banned chokehold on July 17th, 2014 in the borough of Staten Island, New York. Eric Garner's crime was selling illegal cigarettes. Mr. Garner suffered an asthma attack and went into cardiac arrest. When any of you on this call wonder why Black and brown people locally and across this nation continue to cry out for fairness and justice as to how police officers treat us, I want you to remember the cases I just shared with you. But please know there are many more. We don't have to go far, however, to see how white people who have actually killed people are treated by police. Robert Bowers opened fire and killed 11 people attending services at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Squirrel Hill in Pittsburgh on October 27, 2018. 6 persons were injured, including 4 law enforcement officers. Robert Bowers, though shot multiple times by police, was taken into custody alive. On April 4th, 2009, the anniversary of the death of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the mother of Richard Andrew Pawlowski called police because she wanted her son out of her house. She and her son had an argument over a dog urinating in the house. Pawlowski was reportedly wearing a bulletproof vest and was lying in wait. He proceeded to immediately shoot Officer Paul Skula in the head. Almost immediately thereafter, he shot Stephen Maley in the head as well. Officer Eric Kelly, who was on his way home after completing his overnight shift, heard the call for help and arrived on the scene only to be shot and killed as he attempted to give aid to Skula and Maley. Richard Andrew Pawlowski, according to then Police Chief Nate Harper, was armed with a semi-automatic AK-47 style rifle, a shotgun, 3 handguns, a .357 Magnum revolver, a .380 caliber handgun, and a .45 caliber handgun. Mr. Pawlowski had the police at bay for 4 hours. Though there were 600 rounds fired by SWAT teams and by Pawlowski, he was taken alive. This shooting of police officers was described as the second deadliest attack on U.S. law enforcement officers since September 11th attacks following a March 2009 shooting in Oakland, California. But I remind all of you, he was taken alive. My question is, and the question of many Black and brown people in Pittsburgh and across the nation is, if these men who killed multiple people can be taken into custody alive, why couldn't 20-year-old Dante Wright, who was killed after a traffic stop on April 11th in Brooklyn Center, a suburb of Minneapolis, Minnesota, due to what appeared to be an expired license plate? Ironically, this tragedy took place approximately 10 miles from where the trial of Derek Chauvin, who was charged in the death of George Floyd. Apparently, in the death of Dante Wright, lessons were not learned. The Black Political Empowerment Project, on the day of and at the time of the verdict for Mr. Chauvin, April 20th, 2021, was calling upon area and political officials to consider the elimination of several traffic stops, and instead to have summons sent to potential violators of such laws to report to a local magistrate for the adjudication of these potential violations. The magistrate will not shoot, will not taser, or will not maim the potential violators. They will simply adjudicate. The Black Political Empowerment Project has had several organizations from the community write letters of support and to send emails to area police and political officials to support the call for at least some type of reform in terms of traffic stops, as well as an expedited review of their use of force policies. I spoke with Chief Schubert as recently as yesterday about our request, and he stated they are reviewing our recommendations and should be officially responding probably by the end of the month. I call upon many of you on this call to join our community partners in requesting a review of city's policies with regard to traffic stops, And join us in urging an increase and thorough review of police procedures, particularly those which may end in violations of the city's use of force policies, as well as the consideration of more stringent and effective use of force policies that already exist. Some of you may be asking, why is your partnership so important? It really is very simple. Black and brown people, particularly black and brown men, should not have to fear in Pittsburgh, in Allegheny County, in any city, borough, or township in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, nor any place in America, that their lives are in danger whenever they interact with those paid to protect and serve. That is just wrong. It's tragic. If you think this is hyperbole, and if you are white, ask yourself a very simple question, an honest question. What would you rather be when stopped by the police? White or black? I know what the answer is, and so do each of you on this call. What we need, however, is to have everyone on board to be our committed partners on this journey for justice and equality in policing. Many of you are aware of the passionate upsets displayed a few years ago when longtime East Liberty residents were impacted by the tidal wave called gentrification. Some residents who lived in East Liberty for decades were forced to leave their neighborhoods, and some were forced to move to some of the poor suburban communities outside of Pittsburgh. My friend and fellow activist, the former longtime Pittsburgh School Board member, Randall Taylor, is one of the leaders of the Penn Plaza Support and Action Coalition, who, working alongside the Economic Justice Circle and the Pittsburgh Human Rights Alliance, called for a special meeting of Pittsburgh City Council, which took place on May 5th, 2021, to examine the question of how the city of Pittsburgh lost close to 9% of its Black population between 2014 and 2018. I was present at that meeting on behalf of the Black Political Empowerment Project and shared a letter of support for these important efforts. Apparently, one of the lost lessons of Pittsburgh goes back to the mid-50s, when thousands of Lower Hill District residents were forced to leave their longtime neighborhood due to urban renewal, which many African Americans have unaffectionately referred to over the years as Negro removal. This more recent impact on the Black citizens of Pittsburgh has resulted in the loss of some 7,000 Black people. We are collectively fighting for significant expansion in the availability of low to moderate income housing in Pittsburgh. In this time of Black Lives Matter, this coalition of groups is asking the city to adopt a right to return philosophy for its future housing developments. In the region, in the area of future possibilities, we're also seeking a commitment from the Pittsburgh City Council for a significant portion of the anticipated $355 million federal dollars coming into Pittsburgh be utilized for the significant expansion of high quality, low to moderate income housing in Pittsburgh, as well as the rehabilitation and preservation of existing housing stock, which can in turn provide employment and training opportunities for many unemployed residents, particularly African Americans and people of color. We're requesting that these efforts be aimed first at those areas of our city which have been hit hardest by the gentrification of our city, such as the Hill District, East Liberty, and Lawrenceville, which, by the way, has recently lost half of its Black population. In addressing future possibilities, on May 12th, Randall Taylor and I returned to Pittsburgh City Council to urge City Council to use the $350 million coming into Pittsburgh to have as transparent a process as possible to positively address the many social, economic, and equity needs of our city. In a letter from BPEP, we stated that these federal dollars have the possibility of impacting Pittsburgh for years to come, particularly with regard to the housing needs of our citizens, as well as addressing such needs as expanded childcare, healthcare, and human services, economic equity, and support for African American and minority underserved and undersupported businesses. With regard to the use or the issue of housing, we feel that the city of Pittsburgh must be a city for all, not just for those who can afford to pay $1,120 a month for a studio apartment, or a little over $2,400 for a 2-bedroom apartment in the Bakery Square area. Equity demands more. Equity demands better. With regard to examining future possibilities, we who are in the trenches need new allies and passionate partners to fight alongside with us if we are ever able to achieve meaningful equity and equality and justice in all the areas addressed tonight and others not addressed. But this effort cannot be done on a one-day journey, nor a 1 week, 1 month, or 1 year journey. Don't forget the story of the stone mason. We must continue to chip away at justice, to chip away at equality, and to chip away at equity until the burst of freedom floods powerfully and gleefully over our collective faces. It is truly hammer time. We must both individually and collectively shout the words, I can, and yes, we can. Here's a lesson from the past, which must not be lost. In the book, The Martin Luther King Jr. Companion, in the section which describes the historic Montgomery boycott, it states the following, quote, the majority of the Negroes who took part in the year-long boycott of Montgomery's buses were poor and untutored, but they understood the essence of the Montgomery movement. One elderly woman summed it up for the rest. When asked after several weeks of walking whether she was tired, she answered, quote, my feet is tired, but my soul is at rest. Dr. Martin Luther King, in his address to those at the Holt Street Baptist Church on December 5th, 1955, some 66 years ago, in describing his experience with the Montgomery bus boycott, said the following, quote, I was in the kitchen drinking my coffee when I heard Coretta cry, Martin, Martin, come quickly. I put my cup down and I ran toward the living room. As I approached the front window, Coretta pointed joyfully to a slowly moving bus. Darling, it's empty. I could hardly believe what I saw. Eagerly, we waited for the next bus. In 15 minutes, it rolled down the street. And like the first, it was empty. The people of Montgomery showed a powerful commitment to a cause, a steadfastness. That lesson, folks, from the past cannot be lost. That is the level of commitment. That is the level of steadfastness that we need today. That is the level of commitment and steadfastness which will bring us all victory. We look forward to your partnership. Thank you for listening.
Tim, thank you so much. I think that your calling as a preacher may be one to follow here for the next chapter of your life. Thank you so much. So we have about, half dozen or so questions already for everybody. Again, if you hover your mouse at the bottom of your Zoom, just about at Tim's tie, there should be a little chat button. If you click that, a chat box will open and you can type questions in there. So, hey, Tim, I'm going to ask a couple questions that have already come in. And
hopefully I can answer them.
Right, yes. So let me start with 2 questions about the comprehensive Rooney rule with results that you mentioned early in the presentation.
Absolutely.
So the first question is, are you aware of any resources available for someone who might want to find a Black-owned business, like a handyman or a painter, a landscaper, housekeeper, the kinds of things that individual people might want to contract with personally, if they did want to go out and invite a Black-owned business to quote some work? How would people go and find businesses to invite? And maybe I'm thinking that maybe you might remind us a little bit about the comprehensive Rooney rule.
Comprehensive Rooney rule means that we're asking every entity in the region, be it a corporation, company, university, college, or major nonprofit, that you consider African Americans from the entry level to the middle and to the C-suite, to the top. And that you consider African Americans for any contract, be it building a building or psychiatric treatment for Tim Stevens. That's what's going to make the difference. It doesn't mean all of a sudden, just for clarification, doesn't mean all of a sudden all Black people Black people get all the jobs. It means we're in the Rolodex. Years ago, I had a Rolodex on my desk at Mayview State Hospital when I was a volunteer coordinator. I hated the Rolodex. Those little things would fall off, with little teeth on. But what we need to do is integrate the Rolodexes of America, the Rolodexes of Pittsburgh, Allegheny County, and Pennsylvania, so that nothing against white males, but historically, often what would roll out of the Rolodexes for either jobs or contracts or white males. We need to integrate those Rolodexes. That's what that's about. To answer your question, which is a great question, I'm asking Deb for you to follow up with me. I do have a person who has been working on putting that information together. And Deb, since you run our website, let's have a note that we need to put that source up on the website. Excellent, excellent question. I appreciate that.
Okay, I'll also, when Tim gets that information together and it's available on our website, I'll send an email out to everybody who registered for this talk so that you can have insight into how to look for businesses to invite. Thanks, Tim. Next question, also about the Rooney Rule. I'll stick on that theme.
Okay.
Are you aware of any churches that have joined the companies who will have stated that they've adopted the comprehensive Rooney Rule?
I think it would be great to have churches do that, and for maybe denominations, those of you who have a little power and influence, to have a meeting with your denominations to adopt the comprehensive Rooney Rule with results. And that would give even more moral authority, if I may, to the CER Initiative for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion.
Thanks. So next, I'd like to take a question about the political upset, I think it can be called, that occurred in the city of Pittsburgh's Democratic primary, where Ed Gainey won the Democratic nomination for mayor of Pittsburgh. So I'm going to ask the question after saying, let's assume that he will be elected in the fall, given that the city of Pittsburgh is predominantly Democratic. So the question is this: how can those of us in the suburbs support Ed Gainey as the first Black mayor of Pittsburgh?
Let me say this also. I have some papers that are close to me, but I can't reach. This was an interesting election for Black candidates. We had several Black mayors elected in the area. We had, I believe, at least 4 African-American candidates for Common Pleas Court that were nominated, at least on the Democratic Party. And we had at least 2 African-American magistrates nominated, one of whom was the first Black female nominated in the Democratic Party for magistrate. So we had, I just worked on that this morning, right before after I finished the initial draft or the the 4th draft of the speech. But I think that the people on the line who have that question or may think about it later should give themselves homework. Think about that question. And maybe assuming there's not an upset in November, based on the fact that the city is extremely Democratic, send him a letter saying, I am so-and-so from wherever. I don't live in the city, but I'm willing to help you wherever I can. Is there a way I can assist? Make it that open. If you proactively think of something you could do to assist with the city, you can do that. Now, some of the things that I'm asking and ask people to do on this call, which I don't want you to miss. And I'm going to send Deb our letter that went to City Council and was read in our press conference of April 20th, at the moment when the decision was being reached on Mr. Chauvin. It will be a copy of our letter, and I will provide Deb the email addresses of the mayor, the chief of police, the safety director, the Allegheny County police chief, Rich Fitzgerald, the chief of staff for Mr. Fitzgerald, the media director for Mr. Fitzgerald, and the chief of staff for the mayor. I will send all those emails to Deb. My request to you after you read the letter, you have three options that I'm proposing. One is to send an email to these people saying that you're in support of the recommendations from the Black Political Empowerment Project. If you don't feel comfortable supporting the entire letter, you could say number two, that I'm asking that political and police leadership seriously consider the recommendations of BPEP for the possibility of implementation. Thirdly, write your own letter as an organization or as an individual, as a church. Pull out the ones that you're comfortable with and say, we think that absolutely some of these traffic stops should not be difficult to stop. Just so you know that I'm not totally in the hospital from which I came, that several cities now are beginning to adopt some form of cease and desisting in terms of traffic stops. Berkeley, California has begun, and I learned today that there is an entire state, I think it was Virginia, that has passed or is about to pass for the entire Commonwealth of Virginia. There's a few other cities. And the good news is on our call today, Wendell Histrick was on the call, the safety director, and he admits that there's logic in our request and that they are seriously taking into consideration what we've offered and what recommended, and they are doing research on it and expect to be getting back to us in a week or so. And Wendell Histrick thought that there should be something that could be done. So if they could begin to, and they have heard from some people already, but if they can begin to hear from others, because everybody on this call, I don't think there's anybody on this call does not go into the city of Pittsburgh at some point. You want to go into a city that has a positive community relationship between the community and the police. You want to go in where there aren't protests going on all the time because people are upset about police policies, or upset about policies that exist that aren't being followed, or policies that exist that should be removed and disassembled. It's in your interest.
Along that line, the next question, Tim, I'll share is regarding the Pittsburgh Police Review Board.
Yes.
What power do they have to make recommendations or to affect real change?
The Citizen Police Review Board has some more powers than people appreciate. I meant to call Beth Pittenger to be on the call today, and I forgot, since I did mention her. One of the things that they can do, which some people don't think they can do, is they can ask people to come in. They can be, they are empowered as officers to come in and testify on shared information. They are empowered to give suggestions. Also, Deb, if you remind me, there is a report, ironically enough, that was just sent to me this week by Deb Sadowski, or I'm sorry, by Beth Pittenger, that I can share with you. And it's an audit by CPRB and the city controller. And I just saw, I haven't been able to read through it because I was prepared for this, but it is a new report that I can send to you, Deb, to send out to those on this call.
Great.
Also remember that on the Pittsburgh website, I was reminded today, the City of Pittsburgh website, you can go and find an update on implementation of some of the work that we did on the Pittsburgh task force on policing, because some of the changes that we recommended in the 47-page report are in fact beginning to be implemented, and several are beginning to be researched for the possibility of implementation.
Yes, and I did share that link to that website in the chat. I'll also include it though in the email with our follow-ups.
Also, Deb, in that direction, would you also provide them the CER document that
Yes.
those on the call who work or in positions of leadership can bring that document into your business or your corporation, your university or college? Those of us from CEIR, which includes Deb, often are in meetings with leadership about our document and how it can be implemented. One of the things we request is not only adoption, but putting together a team that is charged with creating implementation and timelines. We put in there an assessment tool So if you look at the what is it, about 30 plus recommendations of action, it's only about a 26, 27 page document, but it's extremely comprehensive, and we revise it several times over the years. It's extremely comprehensive, that if you put it into action, it will work. So I'm asking Beth if she would send that document to all of you for your own consideration, and we would love to have new partners come on board with us on implementation of the adoption and implementation.
Yeah, great. I will do that. So Tim, here's a bit of a general question. I'm very interested to see how you wrestle with this one. So the question is this: what is the most important issue for us to focus on? Jobs, education, housing, policing, courts, incarceration, something else? So what do you feel is most important for us to focus on?
That's a dynamic question in terms of how all of that is important. As I said from my conversation with Bill, my friend Bill Robinson from many years ago, he said, just in his many decades of experience interacting with his Black citizenry, the issue of police brutality always came up. But let's be honest, as I listened to your question, it seems like if Black folks were working at the highest level of employment possible, if they were being trained, being mentored, being retained, first of all. Many, if any of you, some of you on the call are African American, we've heard that expression over the decades. Last hired, first fired. We don't need that policy to continue. But if we are working not just at Giant Eagles and unless you're in management or McDonald's and all that, we need people who have jobs that allow them to have families, be able to financially support families, be able to, if not have a house, at least have a nice apartment. And if Black folks are working at a level that we need to be, don't forget the corporate equity document was created because in 2010, Pittsburgh Post-Gazette Harold Miller article said we were 40th out of 40 regions in the entire nation with regard to conditions of the Black working poor and Black children. So if we begin to alter that and alter it drastically, I say it's a mathematical equation that the violence in our community will begin to subside. Black folks just don't wake up and say, let me go shoot somebody. Folks wake up in a mentality that's partially caused by the conditions that they exist in on a daily basis. It messes with their mind, it messes with their psyche, it messes with their heart, soul, and body. The physical conditions, the health conditions of Black people are worse than white people. The economic conditions are worse than white people. Remember, in my early part of my address, white people have 20 times the wealth of Black people, 18 times the wealth of Hispanics in this country, or the Latinx community. So we can deal with that wealth piece, that employment piece, and dealing with the education issue somehow. It's unfair that a Black kid in a poor community wakes up and goes to too often poor Black schools that are just not working, and a white kid, same age, wakes up in an environment of all kinds of support systems, and they wake up in an environment where maybe they had decades of people who have professional credentials. If you find a Black person that has more than their father was an attorney and I'm an attorney, you hardly can ever find more than a generation or two of professionals in the same profession. And sometimes I'm in awe when somebody white can say, oh, we go back, 5 or 6 generations of whatever. Black people can't say that. My great-grandfather was a slave. So we're not that far removed from slavery. I'm not saying that to be dramatic, it's factual. So we have a lot and then white people wonder why we're upset and crazy and act whatever we do. We are crying out for justice. And we cannot go but so far. We need white partners to say this stuff is wrong. It was great as a civil rights activist of over 50 years, even though I'm only 57. It was great to see all these white people in the streets responding to the death of George Floyd. And George Floyd was not anybody fancy. He was not a black athlete that everybody knew. He was just a regular old black man who was lynched before our eyes for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. And as a civil rights activist and as a black person, I was thrilled to see that in many of the demonstrations, probably most demonstrations, there were more white people than black people. So that woke up at least a part of America. So we know there is some hope in that partnership of which I spoke.
Wow. Tim, I appreciate everything that you have done to share an immense amount of information with us tonight. And wow, do I feel your passion. There are a few other questions, but honestly, I think that you have given us inspiration, and I see your glass of ice water is almost empty.
I'm giving myself perspiration, but that's another,
yeah. So
that's another issue, I guess.
Right. So do you have a few more minutes and enough energy?
Or you have a couple other people, that's fine.
Okay, I do. Let me ask one that might be a little bit lighter, which is, hey, Tim, what's your favorite hymn to play on the organ at Trinity AME Church?
That's a good question. One of them is, I'll Be All Right, which is appropriate for this conversation because of the width and breadth and depth of the issues and problems of Black people and people of color in this nation, and all the issues of partisan politics. We need to be all right. So I like to play that. It kind of has a feel of one of the civil rights songs, but that's one of my favorites. I'll Be All Right is the name of it.
I'm going to need to find that. So there's a question here that goes back to something that you mentioned in your presentation to us, a wonderful quote. So the question is this: what helps you to keep your soul at rest when your feet are tired from the work you do to chip away at injustice? Are there certain practices or participation in particular communities that have helped you to stay so steadfast?
I'm not sure. I walk the dog, Mr. Boomer, which I'm going to do when I'm done with this. But I have been blessed at my age with an ability to keep going, with an ability not to be knocked down but so long. I often have said, if those of us who are activists, particularly Black activists, would let in all the conditions of Black people that are so profoundly wrong, negative, and disability and debilitating, we would almost just go in the casket and shut the light out. That's how big our problems are. But as I said in my address, we are victims. We have been victims, but we are more than victims. We must be champions of the cause and bring justice to the cause, even though we're frustrated and denied on too many occasions. We cannot let a negative stop us from a positive. We can't. And that philosophy keeps me going. And I think unless I'm dripping from my lips, not knowing what I'm talking about more than I normally do, I will keep doing what I'm doing until I'm at Jones Funeral Home in the Hill District, because I feel I have to. I don't expect everybody to be driven at that level, but you can certainly drive a bit of the struggle. You can help lead it in your own circles. If you don't want to lead, follow somebody. participate and activate and make these changes work, make them become reality.
I'm going to take that as our close. To follow up, I will be sending information that Tim has mentioned. I've taken notes so I won't forget. So we will be reaching out to all of you in email with a link to the recording of this presentation, including this question and answer session, and the resources and other information that Tim has mentioned. That email will come out shortly, and there may be a follow-on one if it takes us a little while to collect some of the information. On behalf of Tim, I would say that we encourage you very much to share this with others in a way that invites them to watch the presentation and reflect on the challenge that Tim has put before us and on the information he's shared. So it's easy to forward things, but in terms of actually putting a little bit of skin in the game, what I'll ask is that you think about people for whom this message might be meaningful and who might want to join you in taking action in their lives, and take advantage of this time that Tim has taken with us to inspire us and to hopefully inspire others that you can reach out to.
Yeah,
So in conclusion, Tim, I was going to ask Tim,
I
would
just
you like
wanted
to
to
make
thank some of the folks on the call from the Black Political Empowerment Project and Corporate Equity Inclusion Roundtable, and from the Coalition Against Violence to be here to support, and hopefully they got something out of this as well. I appreciate that. Thanks for having me, and hopefully we laid the foundation for movement and a foundation for action.
Tim, on behalf of Community Presbyterian Church of Ben Avon and St. Brendan's Episcopal Church, as well as the many dozens of folks who are on this call, thank you so sincerely for the time that you invested in this, the sleep that you lost in preparing for this, but also for the 50 of your 57 years that you have invested in inspiring others to follow your lead. Thank you very much. And to everybody, we'll have information on our next talk, which is coming up in a few weeks, that will come out in email. And thank you all for joining. Good night. And thanks again, Tim.
Good night, everybody.